Welcome back to the next episode of TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest, Alex Minard, Vice President and Head Legislative Counsel for NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. Alex, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Well, I want to get a little bit of perspective. Let's start with some easy questions.
Sure.
How did you get to your current position? What's your career background that led you to this point?
So I previously worked at the Federal Communications for about 15 years, primarily on USF issues in the Wireline Bureau. Most recently managed the high-cost universal service team and had a great experience there and really enjoyed my time at the FCC.
What led you to leave? I mean, it's a hard place to want to walk out the door. It's such good staff.
It was a tough decision to make. After 15 years, this opportunity popped up, and I kind of made the decision that I either was going to stay forever at the FCC or dip my toe in the water and try something new.
And what responsibilities do you have now at NCTA?
So at NCTA, I have kind of a split portfolio between some of our state affairs, working with our member companies and some of the state trade associations on legislative issues and intergovernmental groups. And then on the federal side, do a lot of work with our lobbyists on the bills that we're seeing Congress introduce or encouraging Congress to introduce.
So let's delve into a little policy, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Broadband has been on the mind of policymakers for a couple decades. But one, I don't call it a relatively new issue, but one is definitely that have perked up recently, and that is broadband theft and vandalism, where you've got really interesting and harmful activity that's happening out there. Can you describe what the issue is and how it affects your members?
Absolutely. It is not a new issue, you're right, but it is something that we've seen an increase in the number of incidents. So the issue is that the price of copper is very favorable on the resale market right now, and so criminals are going out and finding it wherever they can. One of the places that copper is in the old telephone network, and those wires are hanging from poles throughout the country, and they will go and tear down as many wires as they can and drive off and try to resell that copper. It's a little bit frustrating for my members who don't have any copper in their networks. We have fiber wires up on those poles, but they come down in the same act, and they look the same to the criminals, and it's worth it for them to figure it all out on the back end. So there's a lot of this happening across the country, and it's become a significant concern for all of the industry.
What's the frequency of this activity? Is it something, it's once a quarter we see something? Are we seeing it more often?
It's multiple times a day on average. Our members got together with a number of other national trade associations, the telephone companies, the wireless companies, and surveyed the member companies. And over a 6-month period last year, there were almost 6,000 incidents of intentional theft or vandalism.
6,000 in 6 months?
Yes.
Wow. So what does that do to the companies and the consumers? What's the impact?
I think you mentioned that policymakers have been focused on broadband for the last couple of decades. Every benefit you can think of that broadband brings, you lose that when the network gets pulled down. Consumers lose connectivity, hospitals lose connectivity, 911 call centers can't complete the calls. So it's really a wide-ranging impact on consumers in those areas.
Are we seeing it regionalized or localized? Is there certain places it's in the south or the northwest, or is it just kind of everywhere?
It's nationwide, and it's urban, suburban, and rural. The way it looks is different in each of those environments, but it's pervasive. There was an incident a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles, but the two biggest states that have these the impacts that we surveyed were Texas and California, accounted for almost 50% of those 6,000 incidents.
My goodness. So you mentioned the price of copper.
Yep.
Is the price going up? Is that having an impact if I were to take in a strand of copper? It's obviously not in the fiber aspect, but I take a strand into a reseller. Is the money to be had?
The price of copper has gone up 60% since 2020 between 2020 and 2024, and apparently has gone up 30% alone this year. So there is significant money, at least enough to make it worthwhile for folks to pursue this.
And does we know that the copper has been a big issue in the news just this week, talking about new tariffs on copper. Will that, if you have foreign copper that can't come in, that's likely to possibly drive up the cost? Is that?
I suspect that that's part of the increase in copper recently.
What, ultimately, beyond, we mentioned the benefits of technology, but there's a cost to this.
Right.
It's not just be borne on by the providers who have to take time to deploy. Ultimately, is it fair to say this is going to be borne by the consumers in some form or fashion? All costs have to,
Absolutely. It costs millions of dollars for the industry to repair just these incidents alone. And if you think about what the country is currently trying to do with broadband, increasing service in served areas with faster speeds and more reliable service, and expanding it to rural areas, all of that money that could go to those projects is instead being spent on repairing intentional destruction of the network.
Has anyone been spared? You mentioned the joint collaboration. You've worked with a number of associations from wireless industry, a number of fiber guys, a cable industry, obviously, that has fiber throughout its platform. Well, has anyone been spared, or does it seem to be universal that criminals are just indiscriminate?
It's universal as far as the broadband industry being impacted. We've worked with US Cellular, who represents some of the larger telephone companies, and TCA, who represents small rural telephone companies, CTIA, who represents mobile wireless providers, the Wireless Infrastructure Association. All have been working collaboratively along with NCTA and its members to raise the profile of this issue. And it seems like they will go after any metal that they can find on any part of that network, regardless of how it's built.
So there's the profitability side of the equation. What's up with the vandalism side of the equation? Do you have any kind of justification, for those that are intentionally harming the network that's not driven by a cost aspect?
I think vandalism might be a bit of a misnomer. I think from our perspective, it is not necessarily theft. It is theft because they're stealing the facilities, but it's not the same kind of intent of taking the glass and selling it for profit. They take the copper and they sell it for profit. It's not kids, spray painting on the side of the 7-Eleven. This is criminal elements who are intentionally going and trying to find something to resell. But from our perspective, it's destruction of our network nonetheless. We have not seen as much intentional cuts, what you might think of as more the goal be to cut communications. In that incident in Los Angeles that I mentioned, there is some curiosity about the way they made two cuts at different parts of the network that kind of cut the backup part, right? You build a network to be reliable and have alternative paths to connect people, and if one gets cut, you send the bits over a different portion. It appears that they cut both kind of the main line and a backup line, and so, I think the police are going to have to look in to see how that pans out with their investigation, but I think that the effects are akin to what an intentional domestic terrorism type attack would look like, right? The area loses service, 50,000 people don't have service for hours, days, or weeks as the companies have to scramble to repair it.
Do we need some type of education campaign? You mentioned there's no copper and fiber, so
right.
Tearing down that plant, that facility, those benefits has no intrinsic value. Do we need some? Do we have to run PSAs to educate the criminal element out there?
I don't know what the impact of that would be, but it's a good idea, and we might pursue that. I know that we have worked with a lot of local law enforcement on setting up metal theft task forces, and part of that is kind of public education. I've seen images of the fiber spools on the side of the road, the big wooden wheels that have the wire wrapped around it before they hang them from the poles, and the job site will spray paint, not copper, on the side of it just to deter folks from trying to steal that. So there's a couple of different ways that folks are trying to minimize it, but it's ongoing.
So you mentioned law enforcement, and you're working with so many different communities to try and educate and also prosecute and follow up on these issues. Are they taking it seriously? Are you finding a cooperative environment? I know the LA incident you mentioned, there's kind of a discrepancy between, you used the term, what you think is appropriate, but a term that's been used by the companies as well, domestic terrorism is a potential element here, and the local police seem to suggest, well, that's a little bit bit hyperbole. That seems, are they being cooperative, or is it?
I think for the most part, law enforcement is cooperative. There's a kind of wide range of situations we're seeing at the state level. There are some states that have really good laws that protect this kind of behavior. There are some states where the law could be improved, and we've seen success in the last year alone. 13 states have passed laws that either correct a definition or expand a definition or increase penalties. There's more work to be done there, but we've been successful there. And I think part of it is just law enforcement priorities and resources, and there's a lot of other things that they are also responsible for. We want to make sure that they understand that this is a significant problem that affects a lot of people in their communities, not just us. It's the actual consumers who are impacted. But they've been very receptive.
And so let's talk about the federal side.
Correct.
There is legislation that's been introduced in the House. I'd be interested in your take on whether you think that would be helpful for the cause. Does it raise the profile of the issue and the harms that it causes?
I think so, and the legislation takes existing law. It is currently a crime to cut a communications network owned by the federal government, rightly so. This would just expand that crime to encompass those who cut communications networks that are privately owned as well. And I think that would raise the profile and acknowledge the significance of the crime. This is a fundamentally interstate service that we maintain and operate. This isn't necessarily one store corner that keeps getting hit by thieves. This is an interstate service that connects across state lines, and so it may be that the federal response is the appropriate.
Is there a role for the copper recyclers to play here? Do we need to either boost their focus on the issue? Do they coordinate at all?
We have been working with them as well. The Recycled Materials Association has been very helpful and engaged on this topic. They, of course, represent some metal recyclers and probably the ones that are complying with their obligations. There's always going to be some folks out there who are willing to turn a blind eye to the source of the copper, but we've been very successful working with them on identification requirements. When you pull up to a recycling facility, they write down the license plate number or have to take a license information, or they won't pay cash on site, or just educating them. If somebody comes in with a truck bed full of copper covered in rubber wire, maybe that's suspicious.
So talk a little bit, you mentioned 13 states have improved their current statutes. Are there model statutes that you're looking at and say these 3 states have really gotten it right? Or is it across the board that you're really elevating everyone?
I think it's more the latter. A lot of states had existing law of some sort that we just modified either the definitions to expand beyond telegraph or increase the penalties. So I don't know that we have one model legislation that we're pushing that we say makes sense in every state, but we are talking to all of the states to make sure that they understand the problem.
What are the next steps that you see that would be helpful in preventing this and also addressing the current activities? What, is it really moving on the federal legislation? Is it the state side of the equation? Is it in education? What steps could be really helpful here?
We're going to continue doing the education. We've had 2 summits in the last year or so, one down in Dallas, Texas last fall, one in St. Louis, Missouri this spring, and we're planning a 3rd one in California in the fall. So I think the industry is going to keep pushing the education component, the convening component, bringing in law enforcement into those summits and talking to them about what sort of support they need from us and making sure that they understand the impact. So the education and convening will be a significant part of that we can influence. And I think it will be up to law enforcement to go after the criminals as they find them and investigate it and prosecute them to the full extent of the law.
Is there, last question, is there a component here, and you mentioned elevating the importance of the significance, and we mentioned domestic terrorism. Is this become kind of a conversation that at some point we may have those instances like undersea cables where you may see an opportunity for bad actors, really bad actors, to disrupt the communication network of the United States and therefore really hamper the ability to communicate among emergency personnel, community, the government, and everybody else in between?
I think we were asked that question by someone a couple of days ago when we were kind of listing out some of the examples we had. And fortunately, we don't have kind of that crisis example of someone who couldn't connect to 911 and died, or the hospital was connected or lost connection, or planes at airports, right? There are many different ways that this could play out that are horrific to imagine, but are in some ways almost inevitable if it keeps up at this pace. And so I think that's part of our urgency of making sure that everybody understands how significant of a problem it is.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Really look forward to addressing it as it's going forward. Thanks so very much for your time. Really appreciate it.